A few days ago, I released a demo for my upcoming video game, Office Platoon. And I think I blew my game dev load onto the internet just a little too early. A lot of game dev advice you'll hear circling the internet is to start the social media hype train as soon as possible. As soon as you've got one piece of concept art, well then by golly you better post it because you could get an entire fan base based around that one piece of concept art. The point is, I took that advice far too seriously and released the demo despite knowing that it had some glaring issues. I don't know, I just felt I need to rush. But no big deal because it's, just some tiny ass demo. We can just fix it. So, here are my day one patch notes. First off, the bugs. Surprisingly, there weren't that many bugs. Mainly, proteger is just completely broken. And no, I don't mean broken like this ability's so good. I'm not worried about balance yet. I just mean it just doesn't function. It's programmed extremely poorly. You could stay protected even after exiting the bubble radius. The icon to visually represent being guarded just did not behave. So I completely overhauled this ability from the ground up. Not because I'm too lazy to debug my game, well, not entirely because of that, but I also realized that during my own playtesting, a get down Mr. President ability just isn't a good fit for a game with actual physical 2D space like this. It's great in a traditional RPG, where everyone stands in an orderly queue and waits to get punched, since in those games, damage is guaranteed, and a get down Mr. President ability is a way to control incoming damage by redirecting where it goes. It's one of the few control tools you'll ever get. However, in Office Platoon, or really any game where you can move your units across a board, everyone has an extremely strong control tool right out of the gate. It's called moving. Because I programmed the enemies to attack whoever's closest. So if you want Graph Knight to absorb damage, you don't need a silly little specialized ability button. You just drag his ass to the front line. All that Bodyguard did was allow him to do his tanking job from the back line by absorbing hits of those in front of him. And, you don't exactly want this guy on the back line. He's a melee character. He's got limited range and a lot of HP. So the new version of Proteger simply gives him 2 block tokens as well as 1 block token to any allies within a small range. Now I think this new version fulfills a much more clear role. It's the tanking button. When you send him to the front lines, you could have him attack since he's closer to the enemy and can use melee attacks, or you could have him absorb the damage more effectively by clicking this button, or you could use it in preparation. Before you send him to the front lines, you click this button. Pretty simple, but honestly, that's what we want from a starting character. There is also a visual bug with Superclip's rescue ability. Let me tell you a little bit about this schmoove, because it was very easy to program in terms of function, but a little tricky in terms of fashion. Here's what I mean. To get the ability to work, all we have to do is take an ally and move them over there. Easy. However, to visually convey the idea that Superclip is super fast, that he's swooping in just like a superhero, picking up an ally and dropping them off at a new location, and swiftly returning to his original location, all within a single action in a single turn, we're gonna need another block of code for that. To start, we turn Superclip invisible. Since we don't actually want to change his position, we just want to give off the illusion of movement. So we spawn one of these babies, which is a particle, a decoration, meant to look like Superclip mid-flight with all that motion blur. It flies upwards, up, and away, and once it's off-screen, it disappears. And we spawn another one off-screen, but this time to the left of the target we're trying to reposition. The particle then travels to the right, making its way on-screen and eventually colliding with the target. Once it does, the target turns invisible, to indicate that it has been picked up by Superclip. While the unit is invisible, this is when we will teleport it to its destination. Immediately after teleporting, we also turn off its physics behavior. Then, the particle continues to fly to the right, and eventually makes its way off-screen. And soon after, we spawn another particle, this time at the height of the target, but again, to the left off-screen. and again it moves to the right, and once it collides with the invisible target, this is when we will make it visible again, to indicate that the target has been dropped off. This is also when we re-enable physics on the unit, because if we didn't disable physics earlier, gravity would act upon it, and thus the unit would be pulled down, and the superclip bullet particle would miss its target. The particle continues its thing, moves to the right off screen, you know the cycle at this point, and then we spawn another one, again to the left off screen and at the Y position of Superclip's original position. This particle flies to the right and collides with the invisible Superclip, and once it does, the particle is destroyed and Superclip becomes visible once again, to indicate that he has finally returned to his original position. And once you put it all together, you get a bunch of swooshes that I think does a good job of conveying the visual idea of that this unit is being picked up and dropped off by a flying superhero at a very fast speed at that. Now, that wasn't as hard as that long-winded explanation might have led you to believe, but it was a little tricky enough to where there was a bug, where the final particle would destroy upon hitting the target, and thus never reach the original superclip, and thus never turn him back to being visible, so thus one of your units is just now permanently invisible after using an ability. A pretty egregious bug, but it's fixed for now, I think. And that's pretty much it for bugs, because the rest of the problems with my demo were problems, but not bugs. They were the game working as intended, just poorly. First, and most glaringly, was the lack of any kind of tutorial. The fact that they were just completely absent was a bit egregious. Maybe not necessarily because this is just a demo, but at the same time, this is a strategy game, so how to play isn't immediately intuitive. So I started by adding a few pop-up explanations from your boss, asking you if you'd like a tutorial, and if you click yes, it runs through a bunch of menus about the camera controls. There's a camera in this game, which I forgot to mention last episode. You use WASD to move it. There should probably be more fancier automatic camera tricks in the future, like the camera moving to whichever character's current turn it is, but I'm not sure what the best way to go about that is, so for now, the camera's just full manual. But yeah, I think it's kind of important to tell the player about the existence of the camera in the first place, especially if it's full manual. The pop-ups also explain the cover system, which I explained very thoroughly in my last video, but, well, obviously, we gotta explain it in the game, too. While I'm still convinced it's a good system, it is not immediately obvious to anyone playing. It's one of those things you would have to read. The pop-ups also elaborate a bit on the movement controls, which is something I didn't elaborate on in my first episode. And that is how you go about flicking the units across the battlefield. You hold down the left click and drag back to form a line. And how far the unit jumps depends on how far back you've pulled your mouse. It's kinda hard to convey with words. Granted, I think I'm not the best at explaining stuff, but in Gen Z nostalgia terms, it works exactly like the slingshot from Angry Birds. I think a full tutorial level is gonna be needed for this game. Something where you can get used to the controls without actually being in a battle. So that'll be my next goal. Also, fun fact about the tutorial. If you reject the tutorial, it plays this really intense sound effect. Now, the reason it's there was for debugging purposes. One common practice in my game to see why stuff isn't working is to use sound effects. Here's how. Pretty much all coding comes in the form of if-then statements. If button is pressed, then Super Mario does a jump. Now, if my code isn't working, I can attach a sound effect to the then part of the statement. If the if part, the condition, isn't being met, then the sound effect won't play. So I know there's something wrong with the condition. But if it does play, that means the condition is triggering, and the then part of the statement, the execution, is the part of the code that needs fixing. I just think that's a fun little piece of advice that's like universally applicable no matter what programming language you're using. And for this sound effect in particular, I kept it in just because there's something about my primal monkey brain that just likes clicking a red X and hearing a big boom. I don't know, it's primal, okay? Next section, the controls. Because there was a problem that I was very, very aware of during my playtesting, and yet I released the demo before fixing it. And that was misclicks. With the current control scheme, it is super duper easy to accidentally waste all of your action points. This is because pretty much every ability activates whenever you click on the screen, and the only exception to this is like if your mouse is over one of the ability icons. Thus, if you were to say left click out of the window and then left click back into the game window, chances are you're already committing to spending an action to do a thing, when you just wanted to check on your 90 different Chrome tabs. And this just felt way too touchy. So I overhauled the controls to make it so that spending an action point was a lot more deliberate. For starters, remember the pull the bar back to flick a unit thing? Well, previously, that would activate whenever you had the movement ability selected and held the left mouse button down anywhere on the screen. Now, the movement will only activate if you hold the left mouse button down with the move ability still selected and if your mouse is over the unit you're trying to move. Also, I overhauled the attacks by taking a page out of Nubby's Number Factory, because in that game, you hold right-click to aim and left-click to shoot the ball. Most attacks would just immediately activate upon left-clicking anywhere on the screen, which again made it super easy to waste your action points. So now most attacks will require you to hold your right mouse button down, and the aimer guides will only appear with the right mouse button down to like better visually show that you're in aiming mode, and that left click is how you fire, and releasing right click is how you cancel, which is something you previously couldn't do. You could hold left mouse to charge sharp shots arrows, but if you wanted to cancel, too bad. But now I fixed that. And our final big problem of patch 1 is graphic design. Let's take another look at that sharpen animation, not just for me to gloat about it again. You see that? Right there. It is impossible for the human eye to tell that these two icons are supposed to be two different icons. They're monochrome, so their silhouettes merge with each other, and they're far too close, and by George, I put them too close together. But I figured we could do better than just moving them apart. So instead of having these status effects be tokens, like in Darkest Dungeon, they're now tickets, totally original and totally different. Now, all status effects share a visual design language of being plastered on a little paper ticket. And because this is a thing that has a silhouette and an outline, we can use this to also show how many tickets an individual has, which previously my game just didn't. There was no visual indicators to how many shield tokens or feeble tokens a character had. But with the tickets, we can show how many there are. And I also added a maximum amount. Any character can have 4 of any given ticket at one time. And now let's talk about the symbols on said tickets. The drawing on the dodge ticket was just sloppy, so I just had it, I just drew it slightly cleaner, looks a little better. Another point of graphic design isn't just making things pretty though, there's also visual clarity and visual communication. Can you portray an idea with just a picture? Take these two arrows. What do you think these two statuses represent? You can probably guess that one is some kind of power up and the other is some kind of power down. Well, yes, but actually no. Enfeeblement, the status effect that reduces attack power by 50%, was a down arrow, which seemed pretty simple. It makes sense, attack goes down, arrow points downward. And so the arrow status effect, which is positive, blue, but also an arrow, but also not the opposite of the down arrow. But I guess it's a sideways arrow. Anyways, the point of all of this bibble-babble chaborg is that it's confusing. So anyways, here's the point. I changed both of them. So the Pierce ticket, which is the one that lets you shoot through cover, guaranteed, now has a bullet as its icon, which makes sense. Bullets tend to go through stuff. And I decided, you know what, while I was at it, let's change the feeble tokens icon as well. So I was thinking, what could I use to represent weakness, right? What's something that wouldn't hurt very much if you got hit by it? And the first thing that popped into my head was a rubber duck. So the feeble token is now represented by the silhouette of a duck. This, arguably, does not make intuitive sense and goes against all of that graphic design philosophy I just babbled about. But I don't care, because duck. But also because pretty much every game ever under the sun represents debuffs with a down arrow, but very few games represent debuffs with a duck. And another tenet of graphic design is standing out. Even if it's not a good choice, I don't think it's a big deal. The main point is that the tickets are now visually identifiable, you can see how many they have, and they feel more flavorful, and they share a universal design language. That's the important part. And lastly, but probably by far the most important thing that I added was movement guides. Now, whenever you go to launch your units and move them across the battlefield, you can see a preview of where they'll go. Before, if you wanted to move your unit, good freaking luck, you just had to blindly guess how far your units would go when you launched them. It's also especially egregious considering this is supposed to be a strategy game, so it's kind of hard to form tactics when you don't even know where your units will end up when you try to move them. So yeah, extremely basic and necessary features that we're missing kind of seems to be the theme here today, doesn't it? And that's about it for the day 1 patch. I did leave in one bug, however, and that is that sometimes, depending on how the way the physics feel like behaving, Super Clip will just spin endlessly, because he's the only character that ignores gravity. To be completely honest, I don't know how I'm gonna fix this. But I'm not asking for your help, because I'm sure I'll figure it out. But for now, enjoy a little spinning. In conclusion, well, I would have much preferred to start sharing with you all the story and the lore and adding more content. We can't move forward with such glaring, gaping issues behind us. And that is the lesson to be learned today. Take your time. Don't rush. As always, I am creatively bankrupt of graphic outro ideas, so just have some squirrel footage.